All right, I think we are live. Welcome, my name is Neil. Today we're going to be jumping into video that I was working on. I did a previous live where I showed a little bit of my editing workflow. Today, in this first section, we're going to go ahead and dive into my color grading process and what that looks like. I am in Premiere. I do my grading in Premiere. I use a handful of different LUTs, and I basically have what works for me in this process. And so we're just going to dive in. I'm going to show you what I'm doing, and we're actually just going to grade. We're going to grade the entire piece. And so I'm excited for you guys to join me. I want to go ahead and just make sure that I can see that we're live and that everything's working. It says we are live. Great. All right, guys. Without further ado, we'll jump in. Something that I love to do, and you might have heard me say this in the last video, is whenever I'm starting a new sort of session editing, I always just love to duplicate my sequence. It just gives me a safe place to come back to, and it allows me to clean up and do some stuff as we go. And even just if I want to be able to refer back to where things were before, I've always got the option. So we've essentially got to a place with this video where I would say I'm more or less happy with the visuals. I don't think they're going to change. Obviously, if something throws me later as we're watching it, we can go and find something else in what that looks like. But as you'll notice, there's a lot of colors. There's a lot of different types of footage happening here, whether it's drone or, you know, the speaking camera. But then what's really one of the challenges is going to be some of the lighting. So have a look at in this opening shot, the brightness, the sun's coming through, next shot, sun's coming through, next shot, sun's coming through, after, no sun's coming through, again, sun's coming through. In the B-roll, we've got some intense lens flare happening. We've got drone footage to match, all of that kind of stuff. And so now that we're in the new cut and we've got our sequence ready to go, what I'm going to do is just delete all of these extra clips at the end of my timeline, which is what I've been pulling from as far as selects. And so if I hit the A key, I'm able to select everything to the right, just hit delete, and now all of that's cleaned up. And basically, we're going to use some LUTs really to build the look and feel of the piece. Right now, we've got a few things happening already, so let's quickly just break that down. I have an adjustment layer on right now, which is basically loaded with this Kinetic 03 LUT, which is a LUT by Gamut that is just fantastic in my opinion. I really love this sort of like orange and teal feel that it has, but it's not too intense. It's not like super cinematic, over the top like Hollywood feel. It's a little bit more natural, but it emulates that Kodak film. And so if we jump onto the Gamut website, we'll actually be able to have a look at some of their stuff. I love the work that these guys do in terms of color and just their approach to grading. I find it to be really refreshing. So this is a Kinetic LUT that I'm using, which is, as it says somewhere here in the description, that it pairs really well with their base LUTs. And so essentially this is what I would call is more of like a creative LUT, in that it's not going to convert from log, but once it's converted from log, it starts really adding the color science or the look and feel to it. And so I believe it's based off, yeah, here, Kodak 2383 and Kodak 2393, which is what it was inspired by. And that's two of my favorite film look emulations that I've used with other LUT packs and things. But these guys, I think, really just nail it. So if I disable the adjustment layer, you'll notice this is what the footage looks like with just a conversion LUT in Rec 709. So again, turn it on. So we're getting all of these rich, nice colors, a bit of contrast. And in the Kinetic pack, there's basically 5 different Kinetic LUTs. There's 1, and if I enable that again, you'll be able to see there is 2, there's 3, there's 4, a lot more warm in the shadows, and there's 5. And I scrubbed through a bit and found that 3 seemed to be sort of the sweet spot. And so what I've done while I'm editing is I've just thrown an adjustment layer so I can kind of get a feel of what it looks like sort of demo graded without everything being fine-tuned and dialed in. But now we can really dive into the look and what that looks like. But just before we do, I do want to show you, if we go ahead and jump into the original clip, it's this guy, and we scrub to, just somewhere here maybe. You'll notice that what I have done is I've already got a Lumetri color applied to the source clip, and that is where my conversion LUT is happening. So basically my workflow is I'll bring my footage in a folder and load it up, and essentially it's gonna look like that. So this was shot on a Panasonic camera, so we're talking about V-Log, and whether it's S-Log or V-Log or C-Log or Blackmagic RAW or RA-Log, all of them are going to have sort of a similar flat feeling, but you're going to want to use the right technical LUT to convert them. And so if you don't know how that works, basically Gamut at Gamut.io, I've got the link in the description below, has created what's called base LUTs. And essentially they offer, again, V-Log, Apple base LUT for iPhone 15 Pro, which is amazing. I use that on my iPhone, and whenever I'm shooting log footage with the Blackmagic camera app to convert. But again, C-Log, S-Log, Red Log, N-Log for Nikon, and D-Log, which is the DJI log. All of these essentially translate your log footage to Rec. 709, but it also enables you to match between cameras. So what I shoot on my iPhone and what I shoot on my drone and what I shoot, if I was to have a Red or a Sony, I'm able to interpret all of those logs into the same Rec. 709 with the same look and feel. That's pretty neutral. That's quite technical, but that becomes then an amazing starting place for anything that I want to then grade later. And so this has been a real game changer in just how I'm able to work with different cameras. And if you're doing some kind of montage or compilation and you have different logs, this is honestly the best in the industry as far as I'm concerned, with being able to use a conversion, which gets us into that Rec. 709 space, and then being able to start adding what will be the sort of creative look. And I mean, already just out of the box, one click and you're on. It's fantastic. But in case you were wondering in Premiere how I'm applying the Lumetri to the source clip, what I've done is I've double clicked on a clip which loads up the source clip, as you can see here. And then what I've done is I've basically went and found a Lumetri. If you search Lumetri color, I've dragged that onto the clip, and then it'll pop up here in effects controls. So effects is where you find your effects. Effects controls is where you edit them. And what I've done is I've just gone to basic correction and I've found my base LUT for Panasonic V-Log. Again, you can browse for that if you have it somewhere on your desktop. I've actually installed it into my folder, which, quick little hack, there might be a better way to do this, but this is what I'm aware of, and how I do that is if you go to Adobe Premiere Pro and you right click and do show package contents, and then you come down to Lumetri. Here you have what's called LUTs, and so inside LUTs you've got creative, legacy, and technical. So the technical LUTs are going to go ahead and show up in your basic correction here. And so I've installed what my conversion LUTs are here. And then in my creative LUTs, this is where I've gone ahead and installed, whatever other LUTs that I use, like the Kinetic pack, which I bought from Gamut. And so what I'm able to do is either browse here or load it directly into Premiere through the process that I just showed you. Just keep in mind, once you do copy into this, you'll need to restart Premiere for it to show up. But once you've copied and pasted your LUT into these folders, it will show up right inside of Lumetri here in the basic correction. And then in creative, you have another option for look, and that's where the creative LUTs folder displays. So that's where I've installed it. But essentially what I've done once I've added the base LUT to the Panasonic Vlog is I've gone ahead and right clicked and said save preset. And then I've just named it. And so what I can do is when I bring my footage in, I can just go to effects and start searching Vlog, and you'll notice base LUT Panasonic Vlog pops up, which is a preset that I've made. And all I have to do is I drag and drop that onto the clip, and that will take us to exactly where we are now, where it's basically baked in to the source clip rather than it being, you know, something that I have to apply to each clip individually. I just select all of them. I find my Vlog conversion and I drag and drop, boom. And then we're ready to go. So I know that the technical LUT's always going to be on everything. That's not something I'm going to want to turn on and off. And so it's really easy to just be able to apply it that way. And then it's going to be applied to your source, and I don't even need to think about it or worry about it. And then everything I do from here moving forward is going to be sort of my color correction and then sort of the layers of creative grades. The previous episode that I worked on for Unseen Verses, I have that in my project, so in case I want to copy and paste anything that I've done there. But you'll notice there's like a sort of saturation grain layer here, and then there's another adjustment layer, but then the clips themselves can have Lumetri as well. And so I'm hitting it on a couple of levels, the grade, but essentially what we're going to do now is just start grading, start coloring. And so I have decided that I want the look to be this kinetic 3, and so I am just going to leave that on without adding any exposure or anything to the overall, you know, feel or the overall clips, because we're using this adjustment layer which is on everything. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave that as is. I'm going to actually just lock that layer so we don't end up messing with it. And now what you'll notice is if I click on the actual clip, I've also got Lumetri color on these clips. And so I'm going to go ahead and open my scope so I can see what that looks like. And basically this, the way I see it is it's just it's a luminance reading of where everything sits. So the top being your whites and down here your blacks being on the base, and everything in between you can kind of start seeing stuff. So if I come here, you'll notice, see when I'm scrubbing, if you're looking over on this side, you're seeing this red. That's the red RGB interpretation of me, my hand moving. And so it kind of gives me an idea of what skin tone sits at. And I know there's like a technical way to, you know, you want your skin tone to sit at a certain place. I know for me, I personally like it to sit between around 70 and 85-ish in the scopes. Looking at the left side of this meter, I know there's the 0 to 255, which is the white side sort of reading. And then this is, I believe, the technical RGB 0 to 100 reading. And there are different ways if you right click to, you know, you can do a parade, you can do different things to kind of get balance and all. And to be honest, there's a lot of awesome ways for viewing it. But for what I'm going to do, I personally just prefer the waveform RGB. It gives me enough to be able to just make the decisions that I'm looking for. So again, like color grading isn't my main thing. I've been color grading, started doing photos for many years, and then moved into video and started quickly learning there. And so I have done it for, you know, a long time, but I'm not necessarily a professional or expert. I more just do it for all of the content that I'm creating that isn't at a level that I would send to a colorist. And so it works for me, and I'm quite happy with the results I'm able to achieve. And so we'll go ahead and just jump in. You'll notice, as I mentioned here, if we go up to our Lumetri color, if I click on this clip, I've already started doing some grading. And so I did that sort of to get a feel for stuff. So like I'll find a frame that kind of represents the entire image and what we're going to look for. And this is where we just start experimenting with sort of the the sliders, seeing, okay, how warm do I want this? How cool do I want this? And then looking again on the left side, you can see the red as it rises. Ideally, you want everything sort of to overlap a little bit in the space, which is sort of showing your true white. But if I was to make the whites truly pure white, it would sit sort of in this space, but I just don't like that. I don't want it to be that feel. I actually want it to be quite warm. And so I'm thinking around here, and sometimes I will just type it in if I think I want it to be 1 or 2 dots different. And then my tint, again, we have sort of this option to find a space that we like. And so for me, I don't want the skin to look pale, as in like that looks a bit sickly. But if you go too far, it kind of ruins the vibe of everything else. And I'm not going to get into like isolating just certain colors or skin tones and stuff. And so I'm trying to find, for me, what looks right. And obviously the monitor that you're looking at is going to affect what you're seeing. So I try and have a sort of neutral monitor that represents and translates well across various platforms, but I'm thinking around 7.2 feels good. And the reason why I'll spend a little bit more time on nailing sort of my first shot is I tend to copy and paste what I do here to any other clip that comes afterwards that's in the same feel of look and brightness and background and that kind of stuff. And so over here, it is important to kind of pay attention to your waveform and see where you're hitting. You don't want to blow the whites out too much or any of the highlights, but you also want to have enough detail in the mid-range. Again, what I'm looking at primarily is over here where my skin tone's sitting, because that to me is more important than just the background or whatever else. And so I want it to sit around here, to be honest. And so it's going to be slightly brighter than where I had started. Contrast, I'm going to leave that alone for now because I'll probably apply contrast to an adjustment layer down the road. That kind of, will blend everything together by adding contrast across the board rather than doing it to individual clips. I'm going to leave that alone. I'm going to go ahead and, try some of my highlights and just kind of find a nice place. Yeah, I don't mind that. Here, it's important to see how much you're crushing on the waveform. You kind of want it to open up and feel natural as much as possible. I think that to me is probably closer to where I want it to sit. Then here, these are pretty much what the leaves and the brighter parts where the sun's peeking through and how that's being affected. And if it's not making a big difference, I try and just be subtle with it, because when I copy and paste this to another clip, it could definitely affect it more. So I'm going to leave it at 1.7. Now the blacks, you'll notice if I leave them where they were set to 0, I've actually got quite a bit of space here on the bottom, even with my adjustment layer that has sort of the more contrasty look. So you see that's where they're sitting originally. Even with the conversion LUT, this is where they're sitting with the creative kinetic LUT, and they're still a bit too high, because you kind of want them just to kiss the bottom 0 level is what I've found. And so you can go ahead and drag them. You don't want them to kind of bunch up on the bottom. You see how they start bunching up? That's when you start losing detail. But you do want to get it kind of as close as you can on those moments where it's just about to touch it. If you know you're going to add contrast later, this obviously pushes stuff a bit even further. And so because I know I will probably add contrast across the board once I've finished the grade, I do leave a little bit of room. I don't get it just to the edge. I try and kind of move it back and forth to see how sort of the visuals are playing here in the corner with sort of the pink, and I try and find the space where they're not bunching up, but they're kind of just sitting there. So this right for me is about 8.8. And then in creative, we do have options like vibrant, saturation, sharpen. If the clip itself is a little bit soft because of focus or something, I will apply individual sharpening here, but it doesn't seem to be soft. It seems to be pretty sharp. And I would rather do a universal contrast and sharpness and vibrant saturation layer once we get there, which I can just actually apply to this blue layer if I want. But for now, in the process, we're basically going to just be going through and doing this part of the grade to the individual clips. So I'm happy with that. I think it looks good. And now you'll notice our next clip is a drone clip. And right away, you'll just, even looking over on the left at this spectrum, you'll just see how much more contrast there's in it. And it just seems to me a bit intense. And so there's a couple things I want to look at. First of all, I'm going to disable the creative LUT and see how that's affecting it, which it obviously it's affecting it quite a bit. And the other thing I want to do is if we go ahead and we reveal this in the project and we open the source clip, you'll notice that this has the conversion LUT already on it. Again, that's because I have set up Lumetri color, and you'll notice in the basic, I have the DJI log selected. And so that's going to give me this level of contrast, right? So DJI log is a little bit less intense than sort of the Panasonic log or other logs, but it's still a log image, and you'll notice just how punchy that is. That's going to be okay. I just need to be mindful that that's already a lot more contrasty than my Panasonic footage. So if I'm going to be using the same adjustment layer over both of them, that's not really probably going to match all that well. And so either I'm going to have to pull the contrast out on all of the individual clips, or I can do this, which is probably what we'll end up doing, which is I'm going to start cutting my adjustment layer. And wherever there's a drone shot, I'm going to sort of break it. And I'm going to end up doing we can try a couple of things, but what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click on adjustment layer. I'm going to hold Option on my keyboard and drag. Holding Option creates a duplicate. And so now I have the exact same thing duplicated. I'm going to label it Iris. Is it Iris? No, sorry. It's Violet. I'm going to label it the same color as the drone clip so that I recognize that they go together. That just works for me. And because this V4 level track 4 is where I'm doing adjustment layers, I'm aware that it's not a clip. And so basically the reason I've done this is now anywhere there's a drone shot, I'm able to just drag this adjustment layer, which would be sort of my universal properties across everything. The only challenge with this is if I make adjustments to this adjustment layer and it's sort of a clip, and over here there's another clip, it's not going to translate my changes. So I kind of want to get it right now. And so you'll see what I mean. Basically, you'll see we have Kinetic 3 on this, which I want to keep because I want the color tones and all to be the same. But what I'm going to try is a couple of things. My first thing I'm going to do is you'll notice in the creative LUT with Kinetic 3, you have what's called the intensity slider. And so this is how much the LUT is applied. And so my first guess is going to be, let's just lower the intensity of the LUT to sort of match a little bit more to our other clip. And in order to see what our other clip looks like, I've got what's called the comparison view loaded up. And so if that's not already on Premiere for you, you can click the little plus bar and you've got all of these little button editors, and you'll just find this guy, which is your comparison view, and you'll drag and drop it into your bar here, your toolbar of the sort of playback side. So this is really helpful in the grading to be able to see what you're doing. And so let me just find like a frame. There we go, where I'm able to see skin tones and I'm able to see what we just did. And so now when I've clicked on the adjustment layer, any changes that I do are just going to happen over here on the right side still, but I'm able to sort of preview, you know, I can scroll ahead a little bit or scrub ahead to all of this and sort of see, okay, cool, where does it feel like it sort of starts to be in the same ballpark of contrast in the shadows and all. And so we're kind of in here. So I think the 81.2 felt about right. And so I've just basically turned the intensity down of that LUT. And the other thing that I can mess with a little bit is our contrast. And so if I know that it's just too contrasty, but I like the color, I could potentially even keep this LUT in a bit more. So it's pushing the colors, and I could say, actually just stay at 100. And I'm just going to back away on the contrast, which I don't mind the color. I quite like the color. So I think I might take this route instead. Again, a lot of this is just trying things. And so if I pull out there, you'll notice that the color is starting to shift a bit. How much do I want this LUT to take over the color space? I actually feel like maybe I do back this off a bit and then bring some of the contrast back in. Again, I haven't graded the clip at all individually. I'm just looking at sort of the universal feel. Let's try that. That to me feels like a decent starting place. So I'm going to go ahead and lock this adjustment layer. Again, for now, that's just what I prefer to do. And so now when we cut from this to this, I'm still seeing more contrast in this clip, but I kind of like how it feels. I don't know that it's that different. Obviously, this clip doesn't have what we graded yet, so I'm just comparing it left and right here. Okay, I like that. I think that's nice. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just start messing around a little bit with the actual clip itself and seeing what I want to do to this drone shot. Where the highlights, I think shadows are really going to be where we're probably going to want to bring up a bit of detail, because in the darker parts of the image, and because I've kind of got this close now, I can just quickly close it so I can see a bit more how this is looking, and then I can always jump. I don't like to push whites either forward or back a whole lot. I kind of like to keep them the same, and then with the blacks, I'm finding, I think maybe about negative 0.8 will be as far as I want to push that. That to me is starting to feel really nice. Starting to hold the contrast. We've got a nice dynamic range, plenty of color and saturation. So we'll probably end up saturating this a little bit more, but we don't need to, I don't think, probably saturate this a whole lot. I'm quite liking where this sits. Yeah, and if you're looking at our highlights, we're not peaking or clipping or whatever it's called in the video world. I know audio and video crossover in some of the terminology, but again, we can try making it slightly warmer. See where all of this crossover feels most natural. I actually quite like this, to be honest. Now let's jump here, figure out if so I'm basically looking at how it's affecting it in the sort of shadowy spaces versus what I've already got on. That feels pretty good to me. So, okay, again, took a little bit longer on these first two clips because they're basically me developing what I want the rest of the clips to match to. So now it's going to be kind of just duplicating that look across the way. And then once we've done that everywhere, we'll move to the next stage, which is sort of adding global grain and a couple of things. So we're here to this clip. This clip looks incredibly similar to this one. So all I'm going to do is copy Lumetri, click here. I'm going to remove by clicking and deleting what that Lumetri was doing. And I'm going to just paste this one. And so you'll notice whatever the settings are here are now going to be the same there. So we've just basically pasted those clips, and I'm going to look and say, yep, I still like it, still happy with it. Noticing the camera's focus shifts a little bit to the back and then kind of comes forward again, but it's not enough that I want to add sharpening here right now to the individual clip. So now, as you'll see, we have this drone shot again. And so what I'm going to do is click, hold Option. Again, that's duplicating that adjustment layer. Hit N to go to my rolling edit tool, which basically allows me to click between the two clips and drag it to the next place. And because I have the drone labeled this color and the other Panasonic B-roll this color, and then the talking head this color, I'm able to really quickly see where things are. So I'm going to hit V again to go back to my selection tool quickly, and then I'm going to click on the DJI drone shot here that we graded, and I'm going to start just basically doing what I did a second ago, which is I'm going to copy this Lumetri color into this drone shot and see if the exposure and stuff is a little bit better that way. And so I think it is. Only thing I'm seeing here is the blacks seem to be quite dark, and so I might want to go ahead and try doing some shadow. No, I don't like how that's blowing the top out and we're losing color. I don't like how that's becoming quite faded. I think we're actually still about right. So I'm going to go ahead and just paste that. I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to go ahead and paste that to this as well. Now, what I didn't like about this is potentially how bright it made it. So if you look at this clip's brightness and then this clip's brightness, you'll notice that this is sitting a bit hotter. And so what I'm going to do is go ahead and I'm going to come down first here on the exposure, bring it back to where we started, and then potentially see if I need to pull back on the highlights or yeah, I think that potentially might feel a little better. So I'm seeing where the shadows are sitting from here to here, and they're in a similar space on both the spectrum and to my view. And then as you'll see, when we jump to this B-roll clip, it feels again quite different. So I'm happy with that. Great. Now this is our first B-roll clip, but it's shot with the same camera and in a similar environment as these clips. So what I'm going to try and do is basically copy the Lumetri from there onto this. And again, that seemed to do a nice touch, help bring it into the space that I want it. So that's my starting point. And if we want, we can again jump to the comparison. But if we know that we've just come from the drone clip, we're able to, pull that up as a side by side to see how it will transition quickly. And then now what I'm able to do, as you see, I have this clip selected. So anything that I'm doing is going to be affected here only. I'm going to go ahead and start just finding all of the right settings for this clip, which to me, I just want to see how much is in the shadow space. Okay. Pull that white just before the top. I don't want to pull the blacks down any lower because you'll notice on the right side of the spectrum here, which is what the image is, we're already quite close to the floor. And so what I'm kind of thrown by, I think, is probably a bit more of the white balance. So if we pull this slider to the right, you'll notice that the orange and yellow from the left image and the orange and yellow on the right starts to look a lot better. I don't want to push it too far where then the next clip feels unnatural, but I'm definitely able to restore some of the look and feel this way. Yeah, that's starting to work for me. So I'm quite happy. Go ahead and close this down. I can just slide across both and say, oh yeah, no, that seems to transition all right. Then back to this clip. This is, again, a new clip. And so I have probably an old version of Lumetri or no version of Lumetri. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and copy that onto this clip. Boom. Again, this is very similar to the first one. And so I'm not seeing anything here that I really want to address or change. So I'm just going to keep chugging away. So this clip, you'll notice here that there's a couple of moments where it completely whites out with the lens flare. There's not a lot we can do about it, but I also like I selected this clip because I like that feel. I like how it's talking about this tree, and it's talking about, it's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the story. And so it's really offering the opportunity to to kind of make it a little bit mystical or magical by just the lens flares. But you'll notice that there's quite a bit of color and stuff in it. That's because I actually quickly did a Lumetri on it of just, adding a bit of temperature, warmth and all. But I don't think it was very thought out. It was just quickly as I was editing. And so I'm going to go ahead and delete it. And I'm going to paste the previous look, which is this one, to it and see if that translates better. I definitely do need to warm it up. I'm seeing that right away. And so I'm going to go ahead and throw my side-by-side in. And because the last clip that we saw was this, I'm going to base it off that, or base it off the clip that comes afterwards, which to me, these are much more similar. I'm going to make sure that this, the clip that comes afterwards is going to be this one. The clip that comes before is this one. So I kind of want them to be able to it be the bridge. And so I'm going to grade it more to the clip that came before so that transition is a little bit more natural. So you'll notice, first of all, just how warm it is when the sun's coming out versus this. And so if I'm looking at the white on the bark, it turns quite pink if I go far. And so I want to kind of try and keep the whites more or less neutral. I think that is probably as far as I'd want to push it. But then here, again, it's a bit dark. So once we start brightening it up, it's going to affect how saturated it feels, how much the oranges are touching. Contrast. Might actually pull it out a little bit, funny enough. Definitely want to bring my highlights up. And so a lot of people think about numbers on a slider, like how many, oh, I'm at 80, I'm at 90. And it's important to recognize how much you're pushing it. But to me, I'd much rather just look at the image and how it looks. So you can see here just the differentiation between these two. And you'll look here as well how much closer they're becoming on the waveform. And I do want to kind of just push it as little as possible to get it into the space that I want it to be. But then it's looking a little bit faded. And so I'm going to bring that contrast down just a little bit. Again, revisit. I'm looking at the yellow in the background. And I'm looking at the yellow on both sides. This now is feeling much closer. So if I go ahead and disable basic corrections, that was our starting place. And this is where we've got it to. Again, night and day difference. Right. That's making a huge difference. And so this is really what the color correction process is. And if you look at the spectrum over here, see our starting point. And that's partly just how I exposed it, but partly because the sun went behind a cloud and it was just darker, or it might have been a darker part of the forest. But now, boom, we've got it really close. And so I'm quite happy with that. I do notice that I'm getting quite a bit of orange in the whites aren't white in the flare, but I don't really mind that. That's probably the least of my worries because the rest of it matches. I do see it as a little bit more grain and stuff happening because of how far we've exposed the image up from our starting point. But I don't mind. I would rather it match. And so I am looking to see if the image is holding together or falling apart. But to me, it seems to be holding together pretty well. And now you'll notice this part is a little bit flat, and we're probably going to need to push it into the same direction to kind of match this a bit more. And so what I can try and do, it's probably going to be too intense, is click what we just did and copy that Lumetri onto this clip, which again, as I mentioned, is way too far as I had imagined. I'm going to go ahead and throw open my comparison. And because these are the two shots that I want to match it to, I'm not going to go to the last clip in between. I'm going to stay on this as sort of like my reference. And first thing I'm going to do is just pull that white balance way back. I'm going to pull the exposure, and I'm probably going to look a little bit more at where this is landing on the field. My whites. And I don't need to try and make it look like the sun is out in this shot, like it's visibly different, but because it's carrying on in sort of like the same train of thought, I don't want it to become distracting and that people are like, oh, it was really bright and now it's really dark. And to me, the ideal would be for no one to notice that it's graded. And whether they notice that the sun's shining more or they don't notice at all, that's not really the point. I think the point is that they're engaging with what's being said and not thinking about the grade. So I think that's pretty close. I'm going to start this. Where's our... So I'm looking at my skin tones right now, especially in the shadowy areas. You'll notice how pink that makes the background too. And we do have, other options here, curves and creative, where I've got shadow tint and highlight tint and all of this. And sometimes if I can't get it, I'll jump into sort of the more advanced stuff. But what I find is 90% of the time, what I'm able to do with these sliders is enough. I don't need to go any further. And so I'm actually quite liking what happens when I start pulling the shadows down and pushing the highlights and everything else up. I do think I'll need to come slightly warmer. I'm trying to see how this translates on many levels. It's what is the background, what is the foreground, and I think I do need a bit more contrast to match what I look like. And so the subject is often where I'm going to spend my time, and then the background and what happens there is sort of secondary, but I am sort of looking at like around the beard, how dark are the shadows, on the pants, how light is it versus over here. And so now I'm noticing like the pinks are a little bit too intense. That's a little closer. I don't usually mess with the black levels as much, but I think I do need to come down on this a fair bit more to sort of make the black levels match between the two. Obviously I could pull in a bit more saturation or change that a little bit, but that may not be necessary. It's getting a bit closer. Sometimes I like to make a big drastic move and then kind of get into the ballpark and gently move it. And again, I'm not looking at the numbers right now. I'm looking at where this is sitting on the image and on the spectrum. I'm trying to forget whether that's, what level that's at, and I just move it while I look to kind of find that sweet spot. So again, like that, we ended up adding about, 7. It was at 21. Let me see. It was at 21 and ended up at 27, but that was without me thinking about it. That was with me just moving a slider. And so now we're kind of at that place where we're very close. The only thing I'm starting to see is this is a bit more greenish pale than my hands here. And so I might want to bring in a little bit more of that tint. Yep. That feels heaps better. So I can see my shirt's not exactly matching, but also like the amount of light hitting the background versus here, and all of that has changed. And so what I will want to do is kind of go full screen or go bigger with it for a second and just see if it feels right to look at now that we're pretty closely matched, and kind of see, am I happy with my decisions once we're kind of matched, or would I actually back off somewhere? Because at the end of the day, it's not just matching things that you're trying to do. You're trying to make the image look as good as it can. And so some of this just felt a little bit too compressed. It needs a little bit more room to breathe. And so to me, this feels a little bit more natural to look at, so I can jump between the two. Obviously, the colors are going to look a bit richer with the shadows, with the sun not being the direct light, because the way color science works, there's hue, saturation, and luminance. And if you bring the luminance down, the saturations, like the tones feel richer and deeper. And so I could counteract that by pulling the saturation back on this a little bit as sort of like a help match the two. And then later I can decide how much. The other reason that it's getting this is just the amount of, warmth that I'm pumping into this image to try and make it look as good as it can is starting to really add to this. I can also just see the contrast jump. But if I'm coming from this to this, I don't know that it's gonna throw me as much. Cool. So again, a lot of this is just like the time that you have to invest, whether it's gonna work or not. I think for now this works. I can come back later and revisit it. Let's just keep moving. This clip is similar to this clip, except it's maybe not as dark, but I am going to use this as my starting point. So again, effects control, Command C. I'm going to click on here and see I do already have a Lumetri color on it. As you can see, I'm doing some things. I'm deleting that. There we go. I'm pasting this. And for this one, I want this side to side to be this guy, because that's sort of the closest thing that we have to it. The first thing I'm going to notice is a little bit too warm because we've got the sun poking through in the background. Then I'm going to just try and figure out how bright you want it based on levels. Reset contrast, keep that as neutral as possible for now. Shadows seem to be really affecting this side of the image. Yep. So again, now it's just a little bit of this, and then I also want to jump forward to what the clip that comes just before and see how that feels. Okay, getting there. I think that's a lot closer if we disable the corrections we've made. That was our starting point. This is where we've brought it to. Let's go ahead and see this bigger. Is there anything that's color of the leaves? Everything sort of is matching. I'm just going to keep moving. So again, big jump here now. So I'm going to go ahead and I don't think I'm going to paste what I did in the previous one because the highlights and stuff are so different. What I will do is instantly, though, just throw up our side by side with the previous. Give me a quick starting point. And now, without any Lumetri on it, except what I'm about to do now, I'm going to go ahead and start messing with it. Again, I don't want this guy to be super colored. I want it to be a bit more neutral because then we do see it in our drone shots. And if we're seeing it in our drone shots and it looked pretty neutral there, I don't want it to be like blue or super like greenish or something. Probably want it to feel a little bit more like I'm shooting from somewhere dark into somewhere bright. So I think this kind of feel. Bringing my blacks down according to the spectrum. Again, there is no right or wrong, but I'm appreciating more of the like I'm shooting through something dark to something light. And so if we're looking over here on the left side, the spectrum's going to be a little bit crazy, but that's not so important. It's more important that it feels like where you want to be. And so now that I'm like, okay, cool, I like sort of the luminance, the brightness, the contrast on this, I want to just dial in the warmth a bit more to match with what's happening here and then what's going to come next. So I do want to be careful with how much pink we throw in. I don't mind that. If anything, it could be slightly warmer. And then again, it's also like what comes next. Okay, so it's a sort of outside nature shot. Let's have a look at this. Anything we change, it doesn't seem like the blacks are clipping. It's high contrast image, but I don't mind that. That can be okay. Now let's go ahead and grab what we just did. You can see, before and after on this one, starting place, ending place. I'm going to go ahead and copy the effects controls from what we just did. And I'm going to paste it here. You'll see instantly that that's probably a lot closer to where we want this to be. I think I'll just pull back probably a little bit on the warmth and then just try some stuff. Yeah, I don't think we want the whites to be that much, but then shadows, I did quite like them darker. So it feels again like what you're shooting through there's more dynamic range, right? It's like you're not neutral, same brightness out here where there's direct sun as there is in the forest. I want it to look like the forest is quite dark compared to the outside world here. But I still want some detail in the outside world. So how far we push that will determine sort of the balance here. Yeah. Let me go ahead and compare. Yeah, sort of working with this. What about the previous shot? Yeah. Next shot. You'll notice this is part of the same clip, and so this has already been graded since there's no cuts in it. So this is basically there. I quite like this. This feels like it's working. Anything this might be a little bit bright now if what we're saying is the forest is quite dark. So I might try this, pushing a bit of the... Right, this makes it now feel slightly more like the forest is dark. Which is kind of what we did with these two shots. So, just subtle little as we go. Cool. This is probably the part of the video where we do the time lapse, right? Where we just show the rest of the clips being graded. But since this is live, you can just watch along as we carry on with this. This one feels quite different. Has no grading done to it yet. So I'm not going to copy and paste something that I did because its exposure and stuff seems to be a lot closer to the ballpark of where I want it to be. I'm probably just going to quickly make some adjustments on it and preview it next to what comes both before and after. So I want it to be slightly warmer. Here I'm looking at the tree, the whites in the tree. When I'm pulling that slider, that seems to be close-ish. Again, we've got a lot of background brightness cutting through, so I don't want to push the overall exposure too much. So if I do bring the shadows up, I'd probably want to bring this down more, but instead I'd rather just play around with it and see what feels nice. Yep. More or less is working. Check it on and off. If anything, it might need to be a little warmer. So I'm looking at the oranges back here to the like sort of oranges back here. Let's see. Yep, I think this image was a little bit more balanced to start with. So I don't need to push it really far if it's working. It's not distracting me at all. It feels natural. The levels of black in the darkest part and the levels of black in sort of the darker parts of the image here are working. So I'll keep going. Boom. Okay, now we're automatically in sort of a different look because there's no sun and so the greens behind it are quite different. So I'm assuming that's probably a little bit closer to what this or this was. So I'm actually going to copy this guy as my starting point. It's just going to be probably way over the top. Yeah. I think it's moved it in the right direction though, quite quickly. And knowing that the next thing that's going to happen is going to be text on screen, I don't want to start with this image being super bright and then these being darker. And I typically like to darken whatever is, with text over top a little bit just to help it stand out. And so what I am going to do here is probably pull quite far back on the brightness, a little bit on the warmth. I'm just going to do this by eye quick, and then I can throw up a side by side. What I really want to watch is the whites to make sure not to bring them up too much, because that's where it'll start to fight with the text in the next images. And so if I set there being a really bright image followed by a dark image with text, it'll just be a lot more sudden of a transition. And I think it's helpful probably if it's a little bit more of a gradual transition into that. So let's see. Yeah, I don't mind that. It's looking similar in the color space, so I'm going to keep moving. So obviously we could disable the graphics and, see what that looks like. But because I know they're going to be on screen, I'd rather just grade with them there. I'm going to see, do I want to copy from this? Let's try it. We pulled back on some of the intensity of it. Already way closer to where we want it to be. That was just one little paste. Now we can just see if there's anything we really want to change. I quite like the warmth. It seems to match with sort of our default shot. It doesn't seem overly bright, like we're not adding a bunch of brightness to it, so the text feels okay. Yeah, I'm actually quite happy with this. And so you'll see if I bring it up, it just starts to compete, and that's really what we're trying to avoid. But you don't also want it to be like that, where it looks sort of like a background shot. I want it to kind of work in tandem. That to me is working. And you can see up here on the spectrum, that's where we've got the text, and it's sitting right up at the very top because it's full white, which is the 255 or RGB at 100. Okay, happy. I'm going to go ahead. Oh, notice. So what I've done here is a little editing hack, which is if you have a clip that's not long enough, and I'm playing this at 100% speed, I didn't want to slow motion it and make the leaves movement even slower. Because it's a tripod shot, I felt like any movement at all was helpful. And so if I just turn off the text layers, and you'll notice normal playback.
Subtle, skilled in deceit, than any living creature of the...
That little bit of movement's nice, right? And so what I've done is I've taken this clip and I've found basically as long as it can be before it ends, and I either reframe for a different shot or something else. And what I've done is I've duplicated this clip. So you can either hold Option and drag out this, or you can Command C, Command V, copy paste it, right? So basically you'll notice that no one's walking in or anything, so it's not going to give it away. If I go and I've just duplicated a clip, it'll play back like this.
And the serpent, Satan.
You notice that little jump?
And the serpent.
Basically that's because the leaves are moving, right? So what I do is I hit Command R, or if you right click, you can go to clip speed duration, and I hit reverse speed. And so what it does is it plays forward, 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 and then on the exact same frame, it reverses. And so what that does now is this.
And the serpent, Satan, said to the woman,
seamless transition.
Can it really be
right?
that God has said...
And so I can then now grab this clip, and I can drag all the way to the end. And if you don't change any of the timing, obviously if you move frames, then it's not going to line up perfectly. But now this transition is going to be seamless. And so I can go playing back forward, playing back reverse, playing back forward for essentially infinity. And because there's not enough happening in the shot to give it away, I can make the clip as long as I need to. And so that is what I've done here, I think, for a few of the clips. So all that I'm going to want to do is make sure that I'm copying the Lumetri that we did to this clip and pasting it here. And so if they have the same Lumetri, it'll be a seamless transition.
And the serpent, Satan, said to the woman, "Can it really?"
Voila. And then this is a different shot. I am going to go ahead and just paste the same clip. Again, we're very close to what we just had on screen. I quite like that. I might tweak it slightly. I'm going to go ahead and turn my text layers back on so I can see how bright they seem. Make sure we're not losing detail. I almost want it to be that warm. Hope I'm not pushing it too far. Yep. Text is still very legible. Are we sitting in the spectrum? Actually starts to feel better, a little bit brighter, but then I'll probably want to pull back on the shadows. So basically we're creating contrast by doing that. When we push the highlights and pull the shadows, that's essentially the recipe for contrast. So what I'm looking at now is how orange and yellow the background leaves are, and any of the white stuff on the bark. It's about here, I would say. I could go slightly warmer to make it match. I think that's as far as I'd want to push it. But if we now have a look, it doesn't look bad. Turn it off. Again, pretty massive before and after. Get a little lens flare. It's still easy to read the text. And I haven't wanted to do any blurs or anything on it because I like the image. And as long as they both share a space that we're happy with, we can keep going. So you'll notice, same trick where I'm reversing the clip here. Same exact clip though, so I'm going to go ahead and want to just copy the Lumetri to this clip. Should again now be seamless.
Fruit from the trees of the garden, except the fruit.
Yep. Notice same exact thing, same clip reversed. So it makes that transition work. And then this is a new clip. But this clip actually looks similar to this. So I'm going to try just grabbing this Lumetri color and seeing if this, boom, maybe a bit dark. I'm going to undo that and try grabbing instead this guy. See which one is a better starting place. That to me is a better starting place. So that might have just saved us a minute or two by comparing it. Only thing I'm seeing with this is without the lens flare, it's a little bit darker. So I might want to quickly try bringing up the shadows a bit. I am noticing when I go too far, I'm starting to get a bit of the camera grain. And I do like grain, but this is sort of like a gnarly, colory grain, which I'd prefer to avoid. So jump in our side-by-side of sort of one of the first images we had and what I'm seeing is there's a lot more contrast than there is in this. And so I do want to be aware of that and maybe pull back a bit on how far I'm pushing the image. I think that might be a little bit closer, and then we'll just see if we can keep the details in the whites here, but not move it too far. That actually feels somewhat closer. Yeah, and now let's see the shot that comes prior. This guy. How does it blend with those two? I think that's a lot closer now on the highlights especially. So I'm happy with that. Move to the next. You'll notice again, I've done that reverse to clip to smooth the transition. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on a prior clip, Lumetri, copy, paste. Again, you're seeing, look at that before and after. That's really substantial. But it's hopefully smooth from here to here. Yep, beautiful. And then this exact same clip still. I'm just playing it forward, playing it reverse, playing it forward. And they're the exact same duration. So I can basically do that for infinity without any rough cuts.
Eyes will be open. That is, you will have greater awareness.
Great. Same clip still. Quick paste. Great. New clip. This clip, however, looks very close to this guy here. So I'm going to make that my starting point. Paste. Yeah, almost there. It just feels a little bit orange to me with the lens flare. So if that was our previous comparison, I'm going to try this. Yeah, I'm just going to back away a little bit, especially if I know that this is going to have more lens flare as we move. I don't want the lens flare to begin to take over the text. I like it for the creative effect, and this all happened in camera, but I want to be mindful of like how orange that lens flare becomes. Yeah, that feels a little more natural. And then also just like how bright I'm going to let it get so that it doesn't overtake the text on screen. At its brightest, it's about there. So I want to try, if I bring the exposure down, that's probably not our best bet. We're probably going to want more. Make it contrasty, if anything. That's going to help differentiate. See, the more contrast we pump into it. And you do hear the reading. So it's not like you have to be able to like distinguish it and there's no other option. It's just, we don't want the visuals to take over. So see how dark this is? See how bright that is? What I think we're probably going to want to do here is potentially a bit of keyframe animation, because this starts very dark and then gets very bright. And I've now graded it to be where I want it in the bright part. And so it starts to get like that very bright around maybe here. So let's see what parameter. Maybe the shadows. Probably not that. Highlights or shadows are probably going to be our big ones. So in Premiere, how we do that is if we go up to Effects Controls, Basic Correction, you'll notice I've got all of the same thing as the Lumetri. It's not as nice to work from here, but what I can do now is keyframes. And so I'm going to go ahead and add a shadows keyframe and a highlights keyframe. I'm going to select both of those and I'm going to turn them to Bezier, which just is a little bit more of an ease in, ease out look feel. And now you'll notice my highlights are on 12 and shadows are on 14. But back here, I'm going to just click to the first frame of the clip. I'm going to add another keyframe. And I'm going to say, I want the highlights to probably be, let's try 68. And I want the shadows to be 49. Okay. So basically, that looks a lot closer to this clip, and so it's not going to be such an abrupt thing. And I also feel like the temperature might be a bit of a change. And so this here jumps to the next keyframe. So I want it to end there. So I've put a keyframe. Again, I'm going to change them to Bezier. Jump to the previous keyframe, and I'm going to say I want it to start a little bit warmer. So just both images match, right? So now what happens is, as this plays, you'll notice
And when the woman saw that the tree was good
it's going
for
to animate
food, and that it was delightful to look at, and
from
a
being
tree to be
this bright
desired in order to make one wise and insightful.
to
She took
this
some of its
keyframe.
fruit and ate it. And she also gave some to her husband with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of the two of them were open.
So we don't need that side by side, but you'll notice if I drag quickly, you can kind of see the parameters changing, but as the image really shifts, it kind of keeps it still believable. Only thing with this now is I'm seeing the tint might be something I want to also animate. And so I'm going to go ahead and again duplicate the same positions of the keyframes. And it's easy that I can just jump between them, but I'm going to say I want this to start a little, let's see our previous image, 6.4, and then when we get here, I want it to be 1.4. Let's try that. That looks a little bit better to me. I'm now going to play this back in full screen so you can get the effect and see if you're even able to notice what's happening from, let's go from here.
You will have greater awareness, and you will be like God, knowing the difference between good and evil. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was delightful to look at, and a tree to be desired in order to make one wise and insightful, she took some of its fruit and ate it. And she also gave some to her husband with her, and he ate. Then the eyes of the two of them were opened. That is, their awareness increased, and they knew that they were naked. And they fastened fig leaves together and made themselves coverings. I don't know if you've ever had that.
Well, if you're anything like me, I did not notice it getting super bright or super dark. And as you can see, we've made a massive adjustment. But sometimes that's necessary to sort of keep the viewer engaged, not become distracting. So now we need to grade this clip. Is it closer to this or is it closer to this? My guess would be this because the sun's out. Let's try it. It is a close-up shot, so it's a different framing. Yeah, I think that's already heaps closer. So I don't even need to try the shade one. But what I do want to do is bring up our side by side. And instead of always doing comparisons of like what's the closest clip, I do still like to go back to like what my original clip was. So I'm not adjusting and grading to the, my latest clip, because then if like I start going more blue and then every clip I go more blue, by the time I get to the end of the video, it's going to be very blue. But if I keep coming back to the same reference, it's kind of like tuning a piano or a guitar or something. Like if you've got that standard that you're always coming back to, it can fluctuate a little bit, but you've got that locked in look. And so that's what I'm doing here. I'm basically saying that was my locked in look that we started with. And now everything I do needs to sort of replicate that to a degree. And I like to look at what images come before and after to sort of see how it will blend and move and all. But I don't want to keep changing what I'm grading solely to the closest clip that I'm at. I'd prefer here to actually look at the image spectrum and see if my skin tones are hitting in the same place. So if we see the reds and the reds, that's my skin tones. And make sure that the warmth, it's lacking a little bit of warmth. Yeah, I'm pushing it far, but it's just starting now to feel like my skin tones are sort of in that same space of where they should be. And again, every time you make an adjustment, it kind of affects multiple things. And that's the reason why I don't just do one pass. I'll do multiple little passes and make changes. And then it's like, I've already adjusted highlights, but I come back to highlights now that it's, the temperature changed and the shadows changed. And so to me, it's micro movements in the right direction various times. And then as the image changes and shapes, the more you move each slider, you want to come back to the sliders at least once or twice to make sure that what you're doing is sort of being balanced as good as possible. And so that's something that I'm always doing. You'll notice is like I've already adjusted this once or twice, but now I'm actually a lot closer. So again, doesn't seem like much, but if we look at this now and we turn off what we just did, there is a substantial difference. I don't know if I like how much pink there is in a skin tone, so I want to be mindful of that. But again, if we jump over to here, jump over to here, and now jump over to here, you can actually see, because this is a close-up shot, that I spent the day at the beach before recording this, and I have a bit of a sunburn. You can see that especially around my neck, where my necklace is, which means I might want to just pull back a little bit on the warmth of it. Be aware of like how much color I'm pumping into this. Also, there's a bit of a lens flare that's happening, so we want to make sure in the brighter moments there's still good contrast in the shadows. That's feeling pretty good. I think my chair has been sinking a little bit, sort of in the bottom of my shot. Here we go. All right, this is feeling good to me. It seems to be matching with our shady shot, our bright sunlight shot. It does have more contrast, but that's partly just because of how it was filmed. All right, next drone shot. So again, as you remember from earlier, we have an adjustment layer that we're doing that's different for the drone. So I'm going to go ahead and just click, hold Option, drag it here. Because it was a longer clip, I just put it on a layer above so that I'm able to size it. Then I'll just drag it in. That should line up. And so you'll notice it's applying the same color feeling, but it's not as intense as what this is. So if I drag this clip over, see how contrasty this is and how dark the shadows are and all. Whereas if you move to this one, it's just very minor, but it's a lot lighter. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that there. And we're doing that by pulling back on some of the contrast and having the intensity at 78.5 instead of on this adjustment, intensity's at 100 and the contrast is standard. All right, cool. That's feeling good. I do want to copy and paste what we did either to this clip or I'm going to try this one. I think it's a little bit closer to the actual drone clip, not the adjustment layer. Yeah, so we're definitely hitting a bit hot on the exposure, so I have to see if we want to pull back to 0 and then pulling the highlights down definitely brings back some of the mountains. I want it to kind of have that it's getting lost in the distance, but I don't want it to be that intense or that severe, and so that seems to still be okay. Where's our black sitting? That's actually quite nice. Only thing now I'm thinking is temperature. So it feels a bit cool. See how warm this is? We might need to go ahead and warm this up a bit. And I am going to scrub to the shot that just came before. The graded one. Yep. So you'll notice the warmth. We don't want to turn the sky orange. But we also I like that. That's a lot closer. That doesn't throw me. I wouldn't mind some more saturation on this, but we'll probably do that towards the end. Okay, now this is a different clip from this because the sun's not out in this one, and it is a little bit out more in this one. but I am still going to use this as my starting point. So I'm going to copy this Lumetri, and I'm going to paste it. Yeah, that's so much closer. You'll notice I've also zoomed in a little bit on this shot. So if I reset it, it was there, but I have zoomed in a bit, which is just something I noticed. Is there anything we want to change between these? I could bring up the highlights, I'm thinking. Just a little bit. Also just kiss the shadows a little bit. That to me feels better. Let's have a look. You can see it's more contrasty there. We could achieve that by pulling back on the shadows and then pushing the highlights more. But I think it's just the shot itself is a little bit different lighting. So we can decide now how much do we want it to match versus allowing the lighting to change and it not have to be forced to look identical. I do think I need to warm it up and bring some of that color back in. Otherwise, it's going to look a bit different. You'll notice if I bring in some saturation as well, it's going to instantly glue together a little bit more. And so I don't want to add overall saturation to the piece yet, as I'll do that on adjustment layers with grain. But because I'm trying to match to this clip, and this clip is obviously more colored, and it's not because the saturation is up. You'll see it's at 100. Yep, and here I'm at 108.3. I simply am trying to match it. And so this to me is still considered part of the what I would consider the grading process. I'm not breaking any rules by adding a bit of color here. The other option would be to pull a bit of color out of this one, which isn't a bad idea either, since it looks a little bit over the top. And that isn't back here as well, is it? Nope, that's different. So now we're finding a bit more balance, and I'm kind of always jumping around a little bit. Not as colored. Now this guy is a bit more colored, so we can pull him down again. Also depends where the light's hitting. It's a little more washed. It's a little less washed. Here now I'm seeing it's a bit too orange. I'm going to refer to this 15.5 and 10.5 on the 15.5. So I might do like 17. Instead of 10.5, I'll do maybe 13. Yep. Again, just trust your eyes. That's a lot closer. Happy, keep moving. Great. Now, this part here of the video is where it transitions from this location to this location. And we have our work cut out for us with the grade on this because of the lighting. But it's a transitional moment. So essentially, we're going to get to start with what the grade's going to be for this. But I want this to sort of transition well into this. And so I'm almost thinking what needs to happen in this shot, and this shot. So by the time that we get here, it feels like a natural transition. So if there's anything I want to keep from this grade where it feels like one consistent video, that's important, but it's also how do I get to this next look well. And so in order to do that, I'm actually, I think, going to build this look first. So you'll see here, lighting changes. Sun's out, incredibly bright for a majority of the video. But then also, there's some parts like here where the sun is not really out, but the background's quite bright. And so I exposed it well in that like highlights aren't clipping or anything in the original footage, but it's quite dark. And so this is what I've done to this one as a temporary, and this is where we now get to dive in and do it a little bit more close, is I've added 2 Lumetri colors, right? But one Lumetri color has a mask. So if I disable it and enable it, you're able to see that basically I've got a Lumetri color adding a bit of highlights, shadows, and exposure just to the affected area. And so I can easily change that affected area, or the mask opacity, you're able to see, right? Mask expansion, I can sort of edit the parameters here or by dragging it over there. But essentially, I'm just affecting this area, right? And I want it to look as natural as possible. However, I'm just trying to pump some more light into here without doing it to the whole image. If I turn the mask off, or let's invert the mask, right? That's adding brightness to everywhere in the image, and I just didn't want that to be the case. And so I've got Lumetri just basically to add some brightness in here. And then I've got another Lumetri, which is this guy, and that's affecting everything in the image, right? So we do need to be mindful of which Lumetri we're grading. See, that's grading the mask. And then this guy, I think if I just changed which order they're in, would be now, yeah, whatever the top one is what Lumetri will show. I'm gonna go ahead and start looking at my scopes. Where do I want the skin tone to sit? Where do I, do I just need to pull back a little bit on the contrast for this part and pump, even more into the highlights? I don't want to go too intense on just the isolated affected areas. That really becomes washy. Whites are highly affected in the clouds, so I'm going to try and keep those a bit lower. And then we want that to have the right black level, but I don't want it to. Yeah, this is going to be a little bit more tricky, so I just need to balance it carefully. Make sure we're not losing detail. So I'm going to leave it right at 0, I think, because that's where in the darkest part of the pants and the trees, it's not falling apart. But because the shadows are changing a bit of like the strength of it, I'm actually going to pump a little bit of saturation into this to help it match with what's going to come later. And that's not graded either, but I do think a bit of saturation helps. Let's try to overall this. And so now with the white balance, I do want to refer back to what my sort of last image was, or my sort of master open shot grade, which is this. So I do notice right away that it's a bit warmer in the forest, and so I might want to keep a bit of that warmth. I don't want the pinky skin, sickly skin if we go green, but purple clouds are also not realistic. So where is the happy place? Pretty close to neutral, because in camera we did white balance pretty well. Again, let's just go full screen. 0.6 feels good. Again, I'm just gonna do one little more pass where I'm moving the sliders ever so little. Actually want to bring some of that contrast back. I don't like how it's affecting the image when it's not there. And that's why we do this second pass, right? It's sometimes we liked it, but it was because another parameter was out of balance. And so this time I'm like, actually, I'm happy with where it's at. Bring in a little bit more light. And in the same way that now I've adjusted this, I want to go ahead and reverse what order they're in and adjust my selection, my mask, to make sure that I'm happy with, oh, it actually looks better if we bring a bit of contrast in, do that part. And again, this is just the mask that's being affected now. This guy. So I guess it's whatever Lumetri's the last one, the one on the bottom that the panel adjusts. But I mean, obviously we could try warmth, we could try all kinds of stuff, but okay, I'm pretty happy with this. I know it's not a major part of the video. And so for, I think the vast majority of this speaking clip, the sun is out. And so we really are just trying to get to that point. But this to me feels like a better starting place. I am seeing a bit of grain in the shadows from how much we're bringing up the lower levels. But to be honest,
was restored to us.
I'm okay as long as the color feels consistent, which to me, it's not perfect, but again, we're not doing a feature, we're doing YouTube videos, and so I don't have all the time in the world to be able to nail everything 100%. It's really just doing the best that I can. And then if we scrub to the last clip that we saw before our transition, this is obviously nicer because of the time of day, we're in the shade, all of that kind of stuff. But to me, the color of the skin is still about the same. And the black levels and the white levels and everything tend to be quite close. They seem to be matching. So I'm going to call that good enough, good for now. And I'm going to go ahead and now do what we said, which is work from this look to this look on our 3 transition shots. So I think I'm going to go ahead and copy what I did maybe on this shot as my starting point. So obviously the sky is way too orange, but that's a very easy fix. Let's go ahead and pull up on our side by side. So we're able to see what just came before. I think I'm going to want to bring that brightness up. I'm going to find a place where the sun peeks through too, because then that's our brightest point. When there are shots that have movement that get brighter or darker, it's helpful to jump between the darkest and brightest part of the image, just to make sure that it's still interpreting. Again, we've kind of gone with the, like, if we're shooting up towards the sky, then what we're shooting through is darker. So I'm going to still lean into that. Blacks are a little bit crushed. I don't want them washed out, but okay, now let's really focus in on how warm the sky needs to be. Again, I feel like the tint's probably more important and not going too far on that, whereas like blue and orange is kind of more forgiven, but if you go too green or too pink, it really starts to show. Let's see. Cool. All right, just give me a quick second. I'm going to take a break and I'll be back. All right, we're back. Sometimes we need a break. It's good to get up, stretch the legs, use the restroom. But now what I'm seeing here is the gold in the lens flare, like the orange tends to look sort of like the orange on the shoulder. So if I see right here, orange on the shoulder, and then move forward, gold here, they're starting to match for me, which is something that is nice to see. And so it's not even just like what is the color of the sky, but it's also like, are my highlights speaking to each other? Are my shadows speaking to each other? And trying to make things work together. That to me feels like the right amount of warmth. And if we disable what we've done, that's where it was. And so I think it really has come alive. And so I'm quite happy with that. And now for this one, we're moving to this. So I would say for here, I'm not going to pull from something. I'm probably just going to do it from scratch. So I'm going to start seeing how warm should it be. Exposure, how much do we want it to sit in a highlight versus. So here, you can see it's not down to 0 until about there. So we can push it all the way down there, or we can start to see where the blacks start to bunch up on the first level. And that's probably where I really want to go. So if I'm looking at this spectrum, I'm actually having a look here, and down here is 0. That's where they start to clip. But when they start to bunch up, you'll notice here when I'm moving, see how they start to bunch up, and then they move down to 0. I don't necessarily myself always want to go to 0. Sometimes I just want to see where they're sitting. So if that's how they were shot, I want to start to get them to sort of pile up on that first level. And to me, that's enough contrast. I don't actually want to push it further. Here we're going to see how bright do we want the brights. Shadows are probably going to be more important. Again, it's not a bad idea to scrub around the clip as well. See, okay, cool. That's a darker place because the flare isn't hitting there. And so if I'm going to adjust the shadows and the blacks, I probably want to do it more or less from that spot, not just from where it's flared. Right. Okay. Now, how are we feeling as far as like orangeness between? I don't mind it. I'm going to go ahead and just keep moving. We can come back to this if we need to. So I'm copying what I just did on there, and I'm going to paste it to here, and then make any adjustments. So instantly I'm seeing that I probably don't want the brightness to go down. If anything, I'm just going to end up bringing it up a little bit. How much shadow? Yeah. Again, seeing where they start to bunch up, and that's all. I'm going to push it. And then I'm going to see how they translate. To me, that's sort of working. And sort of on the whiter parts here in the clouds, that's where I'm looking what my tint's doing. Boom. So we go from there to there. And so I am obviously blowing out the clouds a lot more in this talking shot. So one option that I have here is to try and match that a bit and push it over the top. And so say that's quite silhouette-y because we're shooting into the sun, and then that's like sun's hitting it. They're both still sort of within the spectrum, like we're not blowing anything out. But now that begins to match slightly better. than if this was, you know, way down here. Look at the blue sky. See, that doesn't really work the same. So I brought it back. 37. And the other thing I'm seeing is the color of the sky looks quite green in this. And I don't know if that's intentional. Again, now we're just on the selection of the mask. And so I am going to go back into Lumetri and change the order. Oh, that actually affects a little bit of how it looks too. That's true. It's not enough really for me to care. But something we can do is we can just open this here, and we do have all of the same parameters. And so if I wanted to address the tint, I'm able to do that just from here as well. I don't have to move anything around. And so what I was seeing is the sky looked a bit green, and I didn't love that. So I'm actually wanting to bring a bit of the tint back, which is going to affect my skin tones. I'm seeing that already. So we kind of find a happy medium between, you know, that feels sort of better on my skin if I'm down here. So what that means is I potentially want to change that tint in my selection area. I could. Only thing is it's going to affect the background too. It's not just one thing. Just going to go in between what's ideal for the skin tone and what's ideal for the sky. And that's probably close enough for me. Cool. And with the grain and added saturation that I'll do later, it'll all kind of come together a bit more. But here, we're going to bring our drone adjustment layer, which has a little bit less saturation, or a little bit less contrast, which is really going to make a difference on these clips, which you can see have a ton already of enabled, disabled. And then I'm going to copy what I did with Lumetri on the previous drone clip and paste it. And now let's just quickly have a play. How much highlights? Doesn't really affect as much because we're not shooting into the sun on this one. Shadows are huge though. So much of the details in the shadows, but we don't want the light to be, oh, look at that placeholder, little bird flies. Ultimately, that's nice, but we don't want the shadows being so high. We want it to still feel like the forest is a bit dark. So I am using the whites to bring up just the image where I want. I'm seeing there's this little spike here. That's this tree, which is, I guess, probably the brightest part of the image. So you can see that this tree right here is what we're seeing here in the image waveform. And so I do want to just be mindful of that and not blow up, you know, the image super bright when there is something in here that is a little bit needing to just not needing some care, needing not to be overexposed and blown out. And so that's cool. I'm quite happy with that. If I do the before and after, it's bringing up a lot of detail in the shadow area, so I'm able to see the trees and stuff, but I'm not losing sort of the richness in color. And let's just see between here and here. That is quite abrupt if you look at the sky, because the sky is a bit greenish here, and then it's like more neutral blue here. We can address potentially this idea by doing some more, you know, creative, like highlight tint stuff. This might be, you know, a place that's calling for it. So if I pull it, oh, sorry, we're in the one mask. Let me pull that above. Which we did notice affects our image a little bit, but if we start pushing it extremes, right? You're seeing it's only affecting the highlights. Well, like if it's too green where it was, there is this ability to just pull the highlights a little bit blue. And what I can do is I can do a side by side with the drone shot that comes that we are just looking at, this guy. And so now I'm able to see the sky on both sides and see my sky, and then sort of play with the highlight tint a little bit to try and make them speak the same language, which seems to be working, but now I'm losing a little bit of that warmth in the skin tones, and so I am going to try and warm that up a little bit in the shadows over here with this guy. Okay, that's pretty close on the side by side, so I want to see it a little bit clearer now. That's actually making a huge difference. So if I turn off the creative look, see how the sky is green and now it's blue, and then I'm a little bit pale and then it's orange or sort of warm again. So that's helping a lot, just that subtle stuff. And so again, I don't dive into that unless I need to. But in this case, this now looks a lot closer to this as well. And if I want, I can come back to Lumetri and reverse the order and see which I prefer. I think that feels more natural. The background's not as blown out, but they're still both doing a heaps. That's the overall image being affected. That's the mask image being affected, but it still feels pretty natural. Okay, I'm happy with that. It's gonna blend with my drone shot a whole lot better now. And now I'm gonna just go ahead and copy what we did to this drone shot to the next drone shot, see what happens. Okay, cool. Looks like it's a different setting, so, or a different like mountain range a little bit. So I'm probably gonna need to bring like the warmth up again. I'm just gonna do a side by side. So I'm able to see, I'm looking at the orange in the orange tree, and I'm looking at the sky. So right now my sky is being too affected by that move, and so I probably want to pull back. Especially on tint, man, that really changes the sky's look. So I'm gonna just move this a bit until I get sort of to a place that feels right. Close. Bringing exposure down will bring a little bit more color in, but I'm just looking at where my exposure is on both of them in the waveform spectrum. And what I am seeing is I probably just want to bring back some of the whites, dialed them down a little bit. See how much that's changing stuff. I don't want the highlights blowing that much. Again, leaving contrast as is for now. That's close enough, I reckon. How do I feel about that? Yeah, that's not bad at all. And then I sometimes like to zoom in, and I have snap enabled. So if you have this snap to timeline disabled and like you're moving, like it won't, like it'll just kind of free flow. But if snap is on, once you get close to something, you'll notice it'll jump, boom, snap. And so usually if snap is on, it's pretty good at getting to where it needs to be. So this is essentially the process. I'm going to carry on, see how far we can get. We're at minute 5 of what is 12, I guess, almost 13, 12 and a half minutes. You'll see this kind of jumps all over the place when we scrub through it. But now, if we look at what we've done from the beginning, we should just see how much closer all of this matches. Oh yeah, it's come a long ways. Even this. And that's what we're up to. Look at the difference, hey? this clip to this ungraded one. This one feels alive, feels like it belongs in this video. This one belongs who knows where. Look at this color of the sky. So yeah, we're going to need to work through that. But that's it for now. I wanted to jump on and stream the color workflow that I've been doing. And we'll continue to do some lives here where I show you what I'm working on. And hopefully this has been helpful. Any questions or things you'd like to see in the future, just drop in the comments. And I will do my best to keep posting and keep sharing what I've learned and what I'm working on. So thanks for your time. Hopefully this has been helpful.